Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Two Doors podcast. I am here with Ryan Bigg. Ryan lives and works in Warrnambool, a town in outer western Melbourne. He's a lead front-end developer at Fat Zebra, an Australian-based fintech company. He moonlights as a tech book author and open source maintainer. He has a keen interest in mentoring and growing developers. Ryan is author to multiple books that have helped many individuals: GraphQL for Rails developers, the Apollo Handbook, Maintainable Rails, Joy of Elixir, Multi-Tenancy of Rails, and many more, writing and contributing for over 14 years. Ryan has an impressive background, seeing the rise of Culture Amp, where Ryan built the junior engineering program, a teacher for Coder Academy, treasurer for Ruby Australia, and contributing to other well-known companies' code bases. Ryan is one of the elites in terms of software engineering and what Australia has to offer. I'm proud to call Ryan a friend, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me here.
How do you feel when you hear that?
I feel like you might have gotten everything. I can't think of a single thing. Oh, maybe the i18 NGEM. I maintain that. So that's reached, I think, 1.5 billion downloads worldwide now. So that's quite a big achievement for that gem. And every time I go to do a release of that gem, my hands just start like becoming waterfalls. So it's so nerve-wracking because I know if anything breaks in it, I'll hear about it real fast.
Yes. And I mean, you've been in this space for how many years now, Ryan?
2007 was my first developer job. So that's almost 20 years now. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And like, you just keep contributing to Ruby and Ruby Australia as well. That's obviously how we met many moons ago. And I'm a big fan of what you've done. And so, yeah, maybe you can illustrate a bit of a picture of what you've been learning lately, or any market trend, anything shifting that you're seeing.
I don't know. I kind of live way out in, I call it the moon a lot of the time. Like I'm coming down from the moon. That's what I think of it. Warrnambool's its own little country town. And apparently there's 100 developers there. If you look at the census data, and then take how many programmers are listed in Australia, divide it by the population of Warrnambool, there should be about 100. I don't know where they are. They're somewhere. So I kind of stay more remote than I was when I was back in Melbourne. What I'm seeing, though, is tend to be more of a shift in more generalist over specialist in not just my company, but other companies around the world as well. They're looking for more full-stack developers. Just as an example of that, last week, I was handling some CloudFormation stuff in AWS. And the very next task I had was, can you look at this JavaScript front-end bug in this one particular browser, why it was failing? And so I was like, I went from the whole back-end spectrum all the way to the front-end spectrum. It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, talk about context switching, and any Warrnambool developers, feel free to build your own hub and community out that way. I'm sure it'd be brilliant.
I'm hoping I'll find some.
and that's fascinating. So, I mean, for a junior developer, if they were listening, maybe they would get quite overwhelmed, right, with going, oh, I can't even, build some like CSS right now or HTML. Like, what would you recommend to not get overwhelmed? Because obviously you've got many things that are in your toolkit.
Yeah, and the point there is to remember that I've collected those over like 20 years of doing this stuff. It didn't come up, not 1 year spent on HTML, 1 year on CSS, 1 year in JavaScript. It's multiple attempts at that stuff and then learning it. If I was giving any advice to a junior developer right now, it's to focus on one piece of the tech stack and try and build something in that. So if you're trying to build something maybe front-end heavy, if you're building a game, for instance, look at all the things that are happening in the JavaScript side of things and try and build it in that. Don't look at deploying it to any sort of AWS environment, looking at CloudFormation or any of that stuff. Just focus on one piece of the stack and try and build a very small thing in that one thing. It's very tempting to try and build something huge and epic for your first thing, but just try and build like a little tiny prototype first and then get some feedback on it. Because there's always developers, like any developer worth their salt is always wanting to leave PR comments or reviews and that sort of thing. But they're really kind about it when they're speaking to juniors, I found. So, yeah, I think getting feedback would be good.
It's a great environment, isn't it? I mean, I'm blessed that we live in Melbourne, where it's like there's some huge tech companies. Like even what you did at Culture Amp was so impressive that you've impacted people's lives that you probably don't even reflect on a daily basis. And you're like, whoa, look at how far that person's come. And I love your point about building, because it's right. The analogy I often use is that you can't use YouTube to learn how to swim. You have to jump in and start swimming and just learn, right? You can learn all the theory, but it's actually in the doing.
Yeah. I've watched so many kung fu movies, but I can't fight for shit. Yeah, it's actually in the doing. You got to do it. The culture around people, going back to that one, sometimes I'll see like LinkedIn updates for them, or they'll message me and be like, hey, I'm now a senior developer here, or like they got hired at a bank and they're leading the infrastructure stack at the bank. And I'm like, you weren't like this 5 years ago. You've gone from like asking me questions quite frequently to now being the expert in that field. Like, that's an incredible amount of growth, and it makes me so happy to see that. When I see them becoming seniors or leads, it means that they have progressed from being a junior to now helping other juniors as well. It's kind of this ripple effect of my experience with them and helping them grow means that other developers, like let's call them second and third generation developers, are now getting mentoring as well. So I really love hearing about that.
And I've heard the Ken Shamrock plus minus equals. I don't know if you've heard of that you need a plus, like a mentor, like someone that is teaching you. You need an equal, so you have that competition, and you need the minus, so you're teaching, so you're solidifying. And it sounds to me that's what some of these juniors who are now progressing into senior have taken in their stride. And touching on that as well, Ryan. So if you were a junior, like you've obviously been writing 14 years, 20 years experience, all of this, like what would you recommend to help people scale quicker? So you've recommended obviously getting feedback. Is there anything else to how to approach?
Yeah, so I guess when you're doing something, building your own prototype's fine, but I reckon doing it with a mentor is really good. When I was living in Melbourne, I actually volunteered on Monday nights to do mentoring, so I called it Monday Mentoring, and I'd volunteer for like an hour to 3 hours, and I even had some people come over for mentoring. I'd put a break in the middle of that, we'd have dinner together, and then continue doing mentoring after that. And that was relatively cheap rates. And it's just something that I could do to practice like ideas for the books and to help them grow their applications. So someone was trying to build a food bank application, and I was helping them build that. And that some ideas from that went into the Rails book, for example. And it helped me by giving me ideas of what juniors are trying to learn about, but it also helped them grow and evolve their learning through that. So yeah, I think doing it on your own is fine, but also find a mentor who can teach you and provide advice on what to do next. That's something, it's advice that I don't listen to myself. A lot of the time I wrote this in my most recent blog post, there's so much that goes on as a lead developer that if I shared it with a soul, I would be persona non grata for the whole industry. Like there's stuff that if I've talked about it once, it means that I might talk about it again. And leads experience this stuff on like a monthly basis. And it's like, I can't tell it to a soul. But if there was like a lead support group, I'd love that.
Yes.
Just like like confidential, almost like a psychiatry, psych appointment for leads. It's like, we just need to debrief over this situation that happened at work. Like something happened. I can't go into detail about it, but I want to share it with somebody just to be like, hey, yeah, that's messed up. Also, this thing happened to me, and I can say that's messed up back to them, like that back and forth. So yeah.
And that's leadership, isn't it? That I forgot who said it on the show. They said that your failures are mine. I think it was Nilu was like, but your successes are yours. But and it's not trying to take that away from other people. Like you have to empower them and see them grow. And on your point then, so how would somebody get a mentor?
Putting a message out in the community is always good. So there's always like forums and support groups, there's meetup groups you can go along to and just say, hey, I'm not looking for a job. I'm not looking to be hired, but I just want a mentor to come and help me out. There's usually people around the community that can help you out and grow you in that way, I'd hope at least.
Yes. I mean, It's fulfilling, right? When you see other people that really grow, like that person that reached out infrastructure in a bank, like a lot more, you're like, wow, like, but you gain a lot from doing it, just like you were saying that you've got more content for the book from actually helping people.
Yeah, and there's stuff that I kind of not really knew yet. I really think that you can't demonstrate that you know something until you can explain it to somebody else and have them do it.
True.
It's like the fifth. There's unconscious incompetence. You don't know that you don't know anything. There's conscious incompetence. You know that you don't know, and then so on and so forth, all the way up to conscious competence. Or unconscious competence, sorry. You do it automatically, walking, talking, that sort of thing. But there's a fifth level, I think, past that, the rumored fifth level, where you can do it unconsciously, but then you can distill it back down to that third level of being able to explain it to somebody to get them to do it, understand the why and the how and the, how we approach this and break it down into individual steps. That stuff is fascinating to me. I've got all this knowledge in my head. No point keeping it in there. I want to share it out with the world and that's why I write books and teach people and see them grow. I get that enjoyment out of it. And when they achieve whatever they're setting out to do, that makes me really happy.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I mean, we're all human beings. We love to connect with other human beings. The whole idea, I mean, you probably remember that little period of the world called COVID where we all got quite insular, I'm just glad that we can see people in person now and go out like
Be
this.
in the same room together.
Yes, no mask. And so switching gears, Ryan, like where's tech going now? We're obviously in the middle of an AI revolution. So it's taken us 11 minutes to say that word.
I was going to say.
But yeah, where's it going?
I feel like we should have started the podcast with, the three words AI, Elon, and whatever else is topic at the moment. AI, I was just talking about this with one of my developers earlier today, that there isn't a good reason to hire junior developers, was his way of opening the conversation. There isn't a good reason to do that because you can hire AI agents to do it. And I said, well, who's going to debug it? Who's going to debug all this code? You can get the seniors to go and debug it, but they're going to move on. There's mids that will then become the seniors. They will also move on. And if you're not supplying new juniors in the industry, there's no point to continuing on as an industry because there's nothing replacing the talent. So I think what we should be doing, maybe not where tech is going, but what tech should be doing is more of an emphasis on hiring junior developers and training them up to support the systems that already exist at the moment. I think, now going back to your topic as to where tech is going at the moment, I love rolling out this line of like, AI is the crappiest it is going to be ever right now. It is the worst it is going to be right now. The benchmark for it next year is going to be way higher. And the year after that, higher again and higher and higher and higher. So your coding agents are going to be like, instead of just writing a file and being like, I want to convert this from this language to this language, it'd be like, this application is doing this wrong thing. Here's the logs. Go and tell me why. And it'll be like, blah, 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 blah. And then it gives you the answer and rewrites the code, submits the pull request, gets another agent to review the pull request. It goes, yep, it's free of security issues. It's got, well thought out code and that sort of thing. So I'm thinking, instead of just working on individual files, like AI is really good at the moment, you put it into ChatGPT as a single file, or you put it in Claude, single file, it'll be repository, and then multi-application scale. So an organizational scale is probably the next layer after that. I'm looking forward to that because I've been working across a lot of different applications at the moment, and it's all in my head instead of in some sort of computer somewhere.
Wow. That's huge, right? So you're saying that working on the organizational level, adopting the tools, but still having the people to help the community keep progressing, and also that can keep it fun, keep it engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd hope so.
Yeah. I mean, the way I perceive it is that AI is here to stay. It's how you utilize it as a tool. Like I use it every day as a tool, but I'm not dependent on it. It doesn't have an emotion. It doesn't have a feeling. Whereas we're emotional beings. We like to think, we like to feel. And right now I feel that people are going to get hired for their thinking ability, not necessarily they're doing. You and I, 100, 200 years ago would have been having a trade and, our surnames. Well, I mean,
I would have been a blacksmith.
Yes.
Probably.
But that was your trade. And now it's like, okay, now it's our thinking. And I heard it yesterday. Apparently it's going to be next is how you care, how much your heart is, how big your heart is, how you can care for people.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of two sides of that particular coin, right? There's the thinking and reasoning about it and being a rational person trying to think through how the computer is interpreting whatever instruction it's got. Great, fine. But the other side of it, way more important, is when you're doing that work, do you care about the impacts you're having on humanity at the end? So the people you work with, the local scope, and then the more global scope. The feature you're implementing, is it going to have any security issues or perhaps compromise somebody's information somehow? One of my favorite examples of that is Facebook released a searching algorithm very early on where they allowed you to search for people's sexual preferences. They didn't limit it to countries. So in Iran, you could search for anyone who was gay, for example, and it turned up a bunch of men who were gay, which is illegal in that country. So they didn't think about the global context of that. For example, how your code gets used once it's in production. Fortunately, I don't have too much of that to think about at the moment, but that is something I think we don't care about, and AI honestly will not give a shit about it right now.
So the ethics
of as
going to
well.
be coming in.
Yep.
And what about the mentality or characteristics like you look for in juniors, or you think high achiever? I mean, as a group, there's always, you take Chicago Bulls, like when Jordan was there, Pippen, they had Rodman, but they had other players as well, right?
Yeah.
That we don't necessarily remember as much, but in a team, there's always like the A players, there's other people. But in terms of what you look for in team people, like there are certain characteristics that you really see escalate that flourish in a career.
I was thinking about this on my walk, because I've got a 20-minute walk now between my office and home. And I'm playing a game at the moment called Factorio, which allows you to build these whole massive factories. And some of the things you can build in the factories, these legendary machines that operate super duper fast. They are like ridiculous compared to the normal quality you get at the start. They are like ludicrously fast. And I've worked with some of those developers too. Not the people who made Factorio, but like the legendary developers who are like, I've done this thing. I'm like, what thing? No. And they've done everything. It's perfect. It's so supremely perfect. You don't need that in every organization. Like Fat Zebra doesn't need legendary developers all the time. I really feel like there's been an emphasis across the whole community around hiring these legendary developers when they only need normal or perhaps uncommon developers, let's say, using Factorio terms again. And so I think what I'm looking for in a developer is not necessarily the, any language you can write, any language you can debug any system, you've got observability, you've got all these keywords in your resume. I don't care about much of that. I assume that if you know Ruby, you can pick up JavaScript quickly. I assume if you know Python, you've probably got some background in math, perhaps. That's helpful. What I care about is the tenacity and being able to reason about the execution of a program. So when the data comes in, it's in this shape. When it exits the program or exits the function, it's in this other shape instead. Can you reason about that and explain it to me as we're debugging it together? And I care about that. The tenacity side of it as well is that I don't want you to give up instantly. The moment you hit any sort of 5 bricks on your path that are, a little bit too high for you, I don't want you to be like, oh, there's bricks in my way, I have to stop here. I want to be like, step over it. Like, what's the next step? You've tried this thing. What about if you just go a little bit to the left? Like, go try this other thing instead. And they can come up with ideas around it. Like, I'll be stuck on a problem for hours and hours and hours, and I just computer. I can't let the computer win. And that's my tenacity. I just am so competitive. I just can't let that win. But I'm just, and other developers, not necessarily Fat Zebra, just ones I've worked with everywhere else before, you can get some people who just have a rough day and they're like, this is too hard. I can't do this anymore. I'm like, well, try this other thing instead. And trying to pull people, not necessarily pull them up on their tenacity, but just encourage them, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is like, you've got this, you can do it. Let's just work on it together and get through it. And I want developers who are good at managing their own tenacity and managing or supporting and encouraging other people, kind of someone like waving the team pennant and being like, yeah, you can do it. Like that sort of attitude I love.
Because you're a team at the end of the day. That's what the code base is. You're all in it together. And I love your point on tenacity, Ryan, because I do see it. We live in a very comfortable age. We're not going off to war anymore. Like, we're pretty blessed in Australia. It's like, so we're not going
no war,
through...
no famines, no plagues.
Yeah. So people, their day is ruined if their oat latte is actually come hot rather than lukewarm. And it's just like, but it's a muscle, isn't it? It's like you have to keep working on it. There's things that you've been through that, and that's why you give a hand down to those juniors and be a great mentor of, like you said, just take a few steps to your left and you'll get through it. But when you're in it, you can't. It's like watching children. They get overwhelmed very easily, but it's a muscle you grow.
I'm definitely not immune to it myself. I've been going for lots of, because it's summer now in Warrnambool, the wind isn't blowing horizontally anymore, so it's nice and bright and sunny. So if I get stuck, I'm just going for a 15-minute lap around the block. And more often than not, I'm actually finding the answer on that walk. And I'm like, what? Why didn't I do this sooner? Why did I get so worked up and then go for the walk? Why didn't I just go for the walk first when I felt that urge of how dare the computer be like this? I should have just gone for the walk the hour ago. Like,
That's a productivity tip for anyone that's just listened to this. Ryan has just revealed something huge, and that is the walk does help stimulate and problem solve.
Yeah.
It's a known fact, but not everyone knows that. They don't go for the walk, do they?
You don't think about it on the walk. That's the goal. It's like you look at the trees and go, oh, that's a nice pink flower, or that's a, I try and identify the ones I know, like that's a Norfolk pine or whatever. And just intentionally distract myself. Oh, that's a Toyota. What kind of car is that that's going by? Or that's a dog. Oh, that's a German Shepherd. Looks like a bit like a Kelpie cross maybe. And just distract myself by not thinking about the problem. Throw myself away from the problem, and then the brain just does something and it ticks over and, oh, that's obviously the answer now.
Yeah.
And go back and done, fixed.
And you're an elite problem solver. So that's
problem causer sometimes.
And any parting wisdoms, anything that you'd like to share with people listening out there, Ryan?
I reckon you got to work on uplifting other people. So hiring junior developers, encouraging them to apply for the roles and training them up. So we as a community are only as good as the least member of that community. We need to work on improving our hiring rates of junior developers, our mentoring through our organizations, and our professional development of of everyone in those organizations so far. So yeah, hire more juniors is probably my parting wisdom.
I love that. And what about if you could speak to your younger self? What would you say to them?
It's pretty rash. I'd say don't be so angry and take a walk.
That's brilliant. That's a great way. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Ryan. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and thanks for sharing your wisdoms, and it's been great.
Thanks, Alex.